Hello, welcome to a special edition of Inside the Birds. It's Jeff Mosher and Adam Caplan, joined, of course, by our tape breakdowns czar, Greg Cosell. The pick has been made for the Philadelphia Eagles, and in my view, and maybe you guys will agree, one of the most unique and fascinating first-round picks the Eagles have made in quite a long time. Adam, before we get Greg's tape breakdown, I really just want to discuss just the concept of the Eagles taking Jihaad Campbell, who played both inside linebacker and some edge rusher at Alabama. And we'll get into Greg's tape breakdown and how he thinks about the fit with Vic Fangio and just the natural abilities. But Adam, one thing you and I have, I think, really tried to put a lot of attention on and direct our viewers to in the last few weeks is one, the Eagles' ability to really, over the last 4 years, stick to their board, which in this case we know they absolutely did. And two, the emphasis they place early on athletic testing. This is a kid who scored a 9.88 RAS.
Oh,
okay. So whether you line him up inside or on the edge, and we'll get into that, this is a kid who is a tremendous athlete. He also happens to be a local kid from Gloucester Township, New Jersey, played at Timber Creek High School before transferring to IMG Academy down there in Florida for his senior year. So already, as most people know, this is my neck of the woods where he played, and I've already got people texting me. I know this kid. He's a great kid, good character. So a lot of really interesting stuff there. But Adam, from an umbrella concept here, from what I'm told, this is a guy. And Howie Roseman said it. They had a first-round grade on him. They did not realize he would make it this late. Obviously, the medical concerns about the shoulder that we'll get into. But this is a player that on their board they stuck to. They didn't go get one player who fits one specific category. They went and got the best player they felt for now and for the future.
Yeah, my reaction immediately last night when it happened was like, wow, they got the best player clearly on the board. It wasn't just the Eagles. I had a former GM text me who is with another team right now, and he goes, wow, that is a steal for them. And I said, why was he there? He goes, I'm sure you know about the labrum. I said, yeah, but he'll be able to play this season. But this guy did make a point, which I'm going to give you guys here. Basically, looking at the text here, off the ball linebacker inside, and I know he's going to probably play both, and Greg could break down what that looks like. But just the off the ball part, when you look at that position, it's a high injury rate position because of the traffic that you have to sort that comes at you, and you have to tackle. When clubs put together their injury chart by position, it's in the upper percentile that suffers injuries in the National Football League. So that's just something to think about long term. But the short term is it's a labrum injury. He'll be fine. He'll recover. He doesn't have a history of injury that we know of other than this one. But this is a hybrid player, man. I know some teams say that, but this is legitimate. Greg, is that kind of what you saw from Campbell at Alabama?
Well, Campbell's an interesting guy because there was kind of a wide variance in his play from when he was a stack backer and when he lined up on the ball. Now, he lined up more than 100 snaps on the ball as a rusher. He went to Alabama as a pass rusher, but they had Dallas Turner and they had Will Anderson, so they moved him to stacked linebacker. My sense watching his tape, and he's a great athlete, by the way. This guy's uber athletic. But my sense is he's still learning how to play stack backer. Now, that's where he played predominantly in 2023 and 2024. But you're dealing with a guy that has suddenness. He's got twitch. He's got range. He wasn't particularly physical in the box. But, again, you have to decide what that means. But, he's not a stack and shed guy. So, we'll see. But he could end up being a pass rusher, too, in pure pass situations, because he's really good at that.
Absolutely. And Greg, that's what speaks to the uniqueness of this pick is that when we discuss this in this episode, we're going to have multi-layered conversations. We're going to talk about your tape breakdown as both a stack backer and an on-ball linebacker. We're going to have a discussion about how he can fit immediately within Vic Fangio's scheme. And then we're going to have a discussion about will that fit be different 3 years down the road? Because as I understand, it could be, depending on how the team looks and its own roster construction. So yeah. I don't remember having these type of conversations about Usually the Eagles take a defensive tackle. He's going to be a 3 technique or a Jordan Davis type, or they take an offensive lineman who might play some guard and tackle. But in this case, it's unique because this kid, the door is open for them to use him in a variety of ways, and then to be used in a way that best suits him, which might be different in 3 years than it is now, because that's what the draft is about, your development and how you see a player down the road.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in my transition, I said this raises the question of how he will be evaluated as he transitions to the NFL. Will Campbell project as a stacked linebacker, or will teams see him as a sub-front edge pass rusher or sub-linebacker that rushes the quarterback? But we'll get into more, because there's a whole sort of macro worldview of Vic Fangio's defense that we probably need to discuss here. Yes. But I think that early on, it's tough for guys to play multiple positions because there's so much to learn. Although if you're just going to say to a guy, let's rush the quarterback, I think you can certainly do that. But he's a really good – I thought he was a better pass rusher on his tape in 2024 than he was as a stacked backer.
All right. So that's interesting. That folds into the conversation. So before we get your breakdown, Adam, this is a guy, though, that he was there because of the medical concerns, because of the shoulder surgery he had after the combine, which does cast some doubt about his ability to start the season. But it's not just that. He did deal with some injuries at Alabama. As I understand it, though, it's not the same situation as, say, Nakobe Dean and the multiple nagging injuries he was able to play through at Georgia. This guy's a little bit bigger, well, a lot bigger, I guess, stronger. And the concerns about this stuff being more long-term or that injury prone, from what I understand, is not the same.
Yeah, the minor stuff it didn't really factor in. It's really, there are a couple things here, and Greg kind of alluded to it. He's relatively new to playing off the ball, and it's maybe, as Greg said, the tape is better as an edge rusher. Well, that plays into it. You have to, when you put a grade together, the Eagles, how he admitted, he had around a top 10 pick on him, and we know other teams had a first round grade on the guy, so he's a very good football player. What I am interested to see, and Greg kind of alluded to it, is he just going to play off the ball? I would say probably not. I think he'll do both. Remember, we reported this at the time. Now, it didn't wind up happening, and there were reasons for it, but they wanted Van Ginkel. They really wanted him last year, but the problem is they couldn't justify paying him what he was going to command on the open market, because he was come back from broken foot. And they signed Zach Bond, right? Zach Bond, who the hell knew that he was going to do what he wound up doing? And, he was really an edge rusher. So do they see him as a 50-50 guy, edge, inside backer? Or do they say, listen, we can't ask him to do both? As Greg said, it's a lot for a young player who's new to this position. They just keep him at off the ball and occasionally play him at edge? That's something they're going to have to figure out, but they're not going to do this right away. He's got to get the shoulder right, and B, he's got to get on the field and see what he can do and not do.
Well, Greg, Howie Roseman said after the pick, he said, Vic Fangio has taught me a lot about usage of players like Jihaad Campbell and what they can do. And we saw that last year, maybe the seeds being sown, where Zach Bond was a off-ball linebacker, but there were plenty of times that we would do the show with you going through the tape, and we would say, hey, but he would come down and play edge on the line of scrimmage and certain five-man fronts when they wanted a 4-2 look, but a five-man front. In other words, Jordan Davis wasn't on the field at that time, and Nolan Smith would move inside a little bit, and Bond would come down.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and this was the point I made earlier about Vic's defense that I said, we need to discuss, is I think ultimately they want him to be a stacked backer. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use him as a pass rusher in pure pass situations or on third down. But of course, there's not 30 third downs in a game. I don't think they drafted him where they did. And according to reports, he's a player they really wanted, and we're actually thinking about trading. You guys probably heard this. I don't know if it's true or not.
They were trying to trade up for him.
Yeah. So, and then they realized the way the draft was playing out that they could get him where they did. I mean, they made the trade with the Chiefs, but the point being is I don't think they did all that just to use him as a pure pass rusher. I think ultimately they want him to be a stack backer. And the reason I think this is critically important is – in the Vic Fangio defense, and I learned this from somebody who was in Chicago at the time that Vic was in Chicago, linebackers are critical in his defense because in their two shell coverages, okay, they do not want their safeties dropping down. They always want their safeties staying as umbrella players, which is not the way, all teams think about cover 4 and two shell coverages. But that's the way that Vic thinks about it and coaches it. So linebackers are critical as coverage players. And keep in mind, you're dealing with an uber athlete who's 6'3", and 6'3" is a trait. Think about, the first play that came to my mind last night when I saw this pick, as I was trying to stay awake, because as Adam knows, that's way past my bedtime.
Mine too.
The first play that came to my mind was Zach Baun's interception against Jacksonville on the first or second play of the game. When you may remember that play this year.
I think it was a pass breakup, not an interception.
No. Oh yes, it was a pass breakup.
It was an incredible drop, though.
Yeah,
on the corner route. Yes.
It was a flood concept, and he had to get underneath the intermediate route. And they went with motion. I mean, they did it beautifully. He played it about as well as you could play it. It was brilliantly executed by Baun. He had to react to motion, but the point is, he had to get underneath that route. He had to get tremendous depth in his coverage. That's the way they use their linebackers in coverage. That plays not for the safety. That plays for the linebacker in the Vic Fangio defense.
Right.
So, that play immediately jumped into my mind. Obviously, I'm a little nuts if that, the first thing I thought of last night at 11:45. But the point is he even though he can rush the quarterback, and I think he's actually better at that right now, I don't believe he was drafted just for that. I think he's ultimately going to be a stack backer, and how quickly he learns the defense and can execute what's needed. He's going to replace Nakobe Dean, and he's going to be the stack backer with Zach Baun.
Well, that is a great point. And as when I looked into it, I got an interesting response of, in order to ask the question of what Jihad Campbell will be a few years down the road, you have to answer it with a question. And that question is, well, 3 years down the road, what do the Eagles still have in either Nakobe Dean or Zach Baun, who only signed a 3 year?
Right.
So that just shows you that the door is open. They're not locked into one specific concept. They're willing to learn about him and let him learn about multiple positions, and that they will put him in as coaches are supposed to do, they will ultimately put him in the best position.
Well, let me ask you guys this, and Adam, you please feel free to chime in.
Sure.
Obviously Vic's defense every defense does, but because I've had these conversations with coaches when they tell me we have 10 versions of this and 10 versions of that. So every NFL coordinator has, a lot of things that you have to learn. But my sense is, and again, it all depends on Campbell. I actually know someone in the office at Alabama who said he's an unbelievably great kid. You probably heard the same thing.
Yes.
But I don't think they drafted him to just sit him on the bench this year. Now, again, there's learning. We don't know how that's going to go, and obviously the way Vic is, how prickly he is, and how, he's such a stickler when it comes to executing everything exactly the right way. We know all that. And he will not put him on the field unless he feels that he's ready to play. But I also think that they didn't draft him to say, well, he's not going to play this year.
Oh, definitely. That's not it. No, as you guys know, first round picks, if they're ready, they're playing. When Geoff and I first started covering the league, they bring first round picks along slowly. Not anymore, man. If you're ready, you're going now. But Greg, I want to extrapolate a little bit of what you were talking about. He's only played inside backer for 2 years. In fact, the first year he barely played, and then the final 2 years he played a ton at inside backer. But here's the thing, and this plays into what you said earlier, and this is I didn't know this about him because you're the expert on it. So it's not quite as instinctive as they probably need him to be at that position. So you got to be patient, though. You can't, and this is where Vic comes in, and obviously Bobby King, did he do a great job last year? Once he's over the injury where he physically could take contact, then it's kind of just a mental thing where you put him on the field. What can he absorb? And Greg, let me throw this back at you. How much different is the Alabama defense from your tape study to the Eagles tape study that you've done on Vic's defense?
Well, under Saban, it wasn't dramatically different because they play a lot of quarters concepts.
Okay.
But I'm trying to think back this year. I don't have a great answer for that because I didn't. Nick Saban. Obviously, I've been watching him for years and years and years. Who was their D coordinator this year? I can't remember who the Alabama.
Remember who their defensive coordinator is, because that usually gives a good, nice tip on.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. He comes from that program, and I love that. He comes from a big time program.
Yeah.
He's got to be smart. You don't play there if you can't pick up concepts.
The other thing too is keep this in mind. You're right about him. In 2023, he obviously didn't play as many snaps as he did in 2024. But he did make the transition. They obviously felt he could make the transition, and that happened when Nick Saban was there. So, that doesn't just happen when Nick Saban is there. They have to believe you can do that. But I thought that, here's how I finished my transition, and I think this is what will happen this year. And this is still very important. My sense is he will project as a sub-package player, especially early in his career, with his ability to both rush the quarterback and effectively play underneath zone coverage. Ty said time and development will determine whether he can become a 3-down linebacker. But I think he certainly can play as a sub player because number one, he can rush the quarterback. And like I said, 6'3" is a trade. He is a long athletic guy. And you can never, we talked about Nakobe Dean last year, and this is no knock on Nakobe Dean as a player. Campbell obviously has way better traits than Nakobe Dean. But let's assume Dean is healthy. I don't even know what his physical status will be. I don't think
it's going to be a while. He had patella tendon, Greg. That's going to be months.
Yeah. So, he may not even be ready to play. But
my understanding is that they're hoping by October that.
Oh, so they're going to be looking for someone to play next to Zach Bond. So, they would love it to be Campbell, obviously, but we can't answer that right now. They would love it to be Campbell.
My understanding, is exactly what you're saying is they've got Jeremiah Trotter Jr. there. They really like him. They're obviously going to look at Campbell in that spot. So just like last year, we saw a bunch of we saw basically Devin White, Nakobe Dean, and Zach Bond all vying for it until it got deeper into camp. You're going to see Zach Bond.
They could easily play, Trotter, who's a very smart kid, knows the system. You can easily see him being their base defense stack backer with Bond. And then based on Campbell's development, he plays in the sub.
Which goes to your point on being a sub guy, right?
Yeah, which I think is the way it will probably play out early on because Campbell, despite his size and his athleticism, as I said, the thing that really stood out on tape is there was not a lot of physicality to his game, and that's something that, again, who knows how that develops over time. It's not as if he's incapable. He's an explosive athlete, but, he's not used to that part of it.
Right. And the interesting thing to me is, and we had this sort of discussion with Travis Hunter, right? Is which coach gets to get his hands on him the most and which one's going to be annoyed that he doesn't. This guy is probably going to work with both Jeremiah Washburn, the edges coach, and Bobby King, the inside linebackers coach. And I'm sure they have a plan. They don't draft these guys without a plan, but one of these coaches is going to want a little more time.
Well,
but
he did say, Jeff, he talked to Washburn. He did say that. Yeah, which is, I thought, interesting because which is he going to, which row going to be in both, as you said. But I want to add one more thing before we move on to the rest of the league. Is interested everybody's thoughts. Campbell 6'2" and 7/8, right? But here's the really cool thing: is arm length, is 32 and a half, which is good for a linebacker. His hands are huge, 10 and a half. Those are offensive lineman hands.
Yeah.
The wingspan at 80. And Jeff, though he knew he was going to have a couple weeks after the combine, he was going to have surgery. He still ran the 40. It was phenomenal at 4.52. He did the broad jump at 10.7.
That's really good.
The fact that he actually competed, Jeff, you didn't shut it down. That is, I know he's look. You play for Nick Saban, or you go to that Bama program. You're a baller. He cares. This is good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and yes, terrific kid. I've already gotten a lot of texts from people who live in my neck of the woods. The kid. They vouch for his character, his work ethic. Going to work really hard. Greg, what is his tape? You talked about his tape as a stacked backer playing the run. How about in coverage, being rangy? Obviously, he's a terrific athlete. Is there anything that jumped out about that?
I think he's okay at that. Because he's long and rangy. But the stacked backer part is. it's funny because here's what I typed. Campbell, while possessing outstanding size and length, did not play with the needed stack and shed traits that are demanded of stacked linebackers at the next level, and there were too many snaps in which he looked to avoid contact or back away from contact. And I said what was truly fascinating about his tape was the contrast between his play at stacked linebacker and the snaps he played as an edge pass rusher, where he looked like a different player with sudden twitch off the ball, striking O-tackles with his hands, with bend and flexibility and closing burst to the quarterback, and playing with high-level aggression and explosiveness. So he looked like two different players. But he's a great, the athletic part is evident. And right. As I said, 6'3" is a trait. So, I mean, this kid, there's a lot there in his body. There's nothing he can't do in his body. And I think the important point that we need to make, because it's the day after the draft, everybody's excited. If when you watch the draft, of course, all 32 teams, think they picked that guy who's going to be an all-pro, as they should feel, by the way. But we know it never works out that way. But the point I'm trying to make is nobody comes into the NFL as a finished product. So people have to understand that. This guy has things to learn. It'll take time. It's not easy. It's the SEC is not the NFL, contrary to what a lot of people think. It's still college football. So you just have to understand that there are some things that need to be coached and worked on, and some things he might get real quick and other things he might not. And that's no knock on the player at all. It's just the way it is. Yeah, no, that's fair. Because we've been doing this for 20 minutes and we've overwhelmingly said good things about him. If this does not work out for him, it's because he's a man without a true position. And we've seen that in different forms of the NFL where guys who are considered the tweeners haven't necessarily found their role. Isaiah Simmons comes to mind, but that's a great point, Jeff. And I'm so glad you made it. You don't have a role. It's tough to find one if you can't adjust just being one thing or another. It's such a great point that you just made, because one of the things that people have to understand is when they start their rookie, I don't know whether it's called mini camp or OTAs, I don't know what the collective bargaining agreement calls all these things. But when you start, you got to line them up somewhere. And he has to learn how to play somewhere. Right. And he has to learn all the nuances and subtleties of details of playing that position. You're not going to line him up, on Tuesday at stack backer and on Wednesday as pass rusher. He's got to learn how to play Vic's defense in one position, because otherwise Vic, and we all know Vic's not going to put him out there. If he doesn't feel like he can actually execute what he needs to execute, he's not going to put him out there. Of course. All right, so good stuff. Let's what else do we want to get into it? Other picks made in the first round? I mean, let's stay in the NFC East, Jeff. The Giants there, I thought they did really well in terms of they stuck to their board. They by the way, they picked up Thibodeau's fifth-year option. That gives them optionality next year. They could trade him next year. Remember, that's fully guaranteed, though. But now for this season, right, they've got Thibodeau and Carter to go with Burns. That's a pretty good threesome in terms of pass rush. Like that. I mean, obviously Carter was the obvious pick. Yep. There's not much to say about him that we haven't said already. He's an explosive athlete. The way he was used at Penn State, and this, Jeff, you're a Penn State guy. He was used in the way that Micah Parsons was used in Dallas, where he line up on the edge, but on third down and pure pass situations, he was often a stand-up joker, moving around. He's got that kind of flexibility and versatility to his game. He's dynamically explosive. I think the power element needs a little work, but it's there in his body. But he's just one of those guys. And then, trading for Jackson Dart, we had kind of gotten the sense that Dart was a guy they really liked. And they wanted to get a quarterback in this draft. Obviously, Sanders was not their guy. And as it played out, I guess Sanders was not a lot of people's guy. And it's it's funny, based on my film study, and I know conversations you guys have had, I don't think it's a surprise from a football standpoint that Sanders was not drafted. But anyway, that's a conversation for another time. But I think the Giants did what they wanted to do in the draft, and now we'll see how it plays out. Look, the thing that getting Dart is he does not have to play this year, and that's the reality of life, and that's probably a good thing. Because I think that he'll need to learn a number of things about the NFL pass games and progression reading, which I don't think he did a lot of in college. I would add this, though, Greg. I'd add this: if Russell Wilson at his age, and I get James Winston's there too, but Russell showed that he's near the end.
Let's be honest about it. He had a good run last season, then it faded. You can't, and I hear what you're saying. Theoretically, you love not for Dart to play this season, but it's always not that easy when you get to November, December, assuming they're out of the playoff race.
Never easy. I agree.
Yeah, that's when, and by the way, Jeff, as I send it back to you, as you know, when coaching staffs and front offices are trying to figure out if they're going to have a job, that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
What happens? Well, so we'll see. We got to get there first. But
the only good thing with the Giants, I mean, for Giants fans, obviously the Eagles fans are not Giants fans, but is I think their defense could be pretty darn good. I think
the Giants can probably say, the Giant fans can say if Abdul Carter is anywhere near what he's supposed to be, they could have the best 4-man rush in football. I mean, you have Abdul Carter, Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau.
And keep in mind they've got 2 solid linebackers in Okereke and McFadden. They signed Javon Holland, who at his best is a 5-tool safety. Didn't they sign a corner too?
They signed Paulson Adebo from the
Saints. Another very solid player. They obviously are hoping they can reach Banks, the kid from Maryland, who has every trait you want to be a corner in this league, but for whatever reason, it hasn't happened yet. I don't know the kid, so I can't speak to that. You may have had discussions about that, Adam. I know you talk to people. But if Banks, maybe with a veteran like Adebo, who's a solid, kid, maybe he, because you always hear coaches talk about, well, the room, the quarterback room, the wide receiver room, the DB room, they're hoping, I'm sure, that Adebo and Holland, 2 veterans who are smart, savvy, understand the league, can help someone like Banks, because Banks has big time traits.
Yeah. I see a lot of 13-6 games for them in their near future. I just don't know which end that they're going to be on of that.
Well, the point is, Adam makes a great point. I mean, if you have a defense like that, and they've got to figure out what they're going to do at running back, I think they need a true lead back in this offense. And then they still have to figure out their O-line. It's tough to put Dart out there behind that O-line because you just don't want to do that right now.
Correct. All right. The Cowboys make what I thought was a very sensible, as they have done a lot over the last few years, a sensible and smart pick. They get the best guard in the draft in Tyler Booker. And they have 3 Tylers on the offensive line now. Tyler Smith, Tyler Booker, and Guyton. What's Guyton's first name?
Tyler, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought it's Tyler Guyton. Right? Yeah, that is great. Maybe that's an NFL first. 3 Tylers.
I'm wondering the market on Tylers, but obviously, Greg. I mean, when we talked about Booker, you really liked his tape as a road grader, as an inside.
That's what he is.
Like to pound it inside. Yeah,
he's a scheme specific player, but a great player in that concept. He's not really teams that, let's say, major and outside zone would not view Tyler Booker as their guy. But if you're going to run inside stuff, duo, gap scheme, Booker is probably the best guard prospect in the draft. Right. And I think, obviously the Cowboys know that. Everybody knows that. That's, the tape tells you that. So it's a really good pick. The main thing, obviously they want him to step right in and be a starter. And the other key question for them is, can Tyler Guyton play left tackle? Because they drafted him in the first round a year ago. He had never played left tackle. He had only started 14 games on the offensive line at Oklahoma. He was overmatched a year ago, as we all know. We saw the tape. You guys know that as well as I do. The key is, can he play left tackle? Because if he can play left tackle and takes a major step forward, then they'll play Booker at right guard because Tyler Smith will stay at left guard, and he's a good player. And they'll have a solid O-line.
Yeah. And by the way, that their 2 running backs aren't great, but when they've been successful, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, they've been successful running between the tackles. And
the thing is, Javonte Williams in particular, and again, I know he had the major injury, but I was not the only one who loved him coming out of North Carolina. There were a lot of people who loved that kid. And maybe he's healthy now. It's another year removed. Last year, he did not look like the same guy at all, which is why he's no longer a Bronco. But if he can be what he was coming out of North Carolina, he is a true gap scheme, downhill duo type runner. And I'm sure that's what they have in mind. And that's why Booker is a fit in their mind.
Awesome. Adam, when we talk about the Commanders, remember we did our mock draft and we said, we will know that the Commanders have truly turned the page, learned from their past mistakes, if they avoid the fancy, we knew they still need another dynamic playmaker, and we'll see what happens the rest of that. But if they did go offensive line or trenches, something like that, we knew that they were really starting to turn the page to a smart organization. That pick that they made, I know Eagles fans don't like when we credit the opponents, the NFC East, but them getting offensive line, that guy in particular, I thought was a really good pick for them.
It's fascinating because when you look at their situation, obviously they have Tunsil at left tackle, so Connolly's not going to play left tackle. But they had a high grade, as I understand it. First of all, they love Connolly, but it's interesting, and we're seeing this in recent years. Clubs are okay for taking a guy and he was a left tackle in college, we'll move him to right. He's still got to learn it at their level. But you now add Tunsil, Connolly at right tackle. Biotish is still their center, who's a quality center. Now, Cosme is a really good right guard, but he's come back from a torn ACL. Andrew Wiley took a pay cut. I'm sorry. The right tackle took a pay cut.
Allegretti?
Was it Wiley? It was Wiley last year, right? It was Andrew Wiley. Yeah, he took a pay cut, so this plays into it. And Brandon Coleman, who I'm told they were going to play at right tackle, now he might as well go to guard. So this makes their lineup better. Now they have better depth. Jeff, as I send it back to you, what Washington needs to get out of the next 2 rounds is juice at running back and an explosive playmaker at receiver if they can. They're building stuff there in Washington. Through Daniel Snyder's ownership, they just were never really competitive. Now they got something going on there in DC. It's looking a lot better. It is.
If I'm Adam Peters, I may be I may be trying to move up in this second round and get myself Luther Burden because he's still out there. There are some other good speed dimensions as well. But Greg, what did you think of the Connolly pick from a tape standpoint?
Well, I thought the 2 most athletic offensive tackles in this draft, athletic, that's the key word, were Connolly and Simmons, who then went to the Chiefs. And it was a great pick by the Chiefs because they really need O-line help. But obviously they traded for Tunsil, so Connolly is going to move to right tackle because they're not moving Tunsil. But, Adam made the great point. Now they've got depth. Now they can move some people around. Brandon Coleman, I think he had to play left tackle for them last year. Clearly is not a left tackle, but he held his own for the most part. Yeah. And, I think he can be a really solid guard. We'll see how it all plays out. But the point is they've got competition now, and they've got some, good players. And they didn't really have competition a year ago. And you hear coaches talk about that all the time. They want competition. And now, look, Anna makes a great point, too, about Connolly. He's played left tackle his whole life. He does have to move to right tackle. Sometimes the transition's easy. Sometimes it's hard. Penny Sewell, who's now one of the best right tackles. He and Lane Johnson are probably the 2 best right tackles in football. His first year playing right tackle after he was a left tackle at Oregon, he struggled. He had to work through all that. It's totally different with your kick slides, with your use of hands. Everybody just assumes it's easy. Right. So we'll see with Connolly, but there's no question he's got the physical traits to do so.
All right, great stuff. Let's finish this conversation off. Just a look at day 2 here, rounds 2 and 3. If you're an Eagles fan, right, or even if you're Howie Roseman, right, hey, still good safety options, still good tight end options, still good cornerback options, and we know the Eagles have a lot of picks, Adam.
Where do they draft in round 2, Jeff? Where's the 64?
64, but I sort of tend to think this is the round where Howie will be this in the 3rd round be aggressive to get guys.
There's again, we don't know what their board looks like, but Emin Wari's out there, Watts is out there. There's good safeties out there that are very, Makuba, who, I love Makuba. The big issue, as we discussed when we did our safeties, for the draft, is just his weight. But Makuba is, if you feel you can put 10 pounds on Makuba and he can be the same guy, then he's really a good prospect.
Yep. And then tight ends, of course, Mason Taylor's still out there. Yep. Eli Arroyo still out there. Terrence Ferguson's still out there. So Trey Amos, the cornerback from Ole Miss. And there are some really good players. I mentioned Luther Burden, a wide receiver who's still out there. So, there'll be some – I think that you're going to see some movement.
I think early tonight in round 2, you could see, that's where you see a lot of trades. Like somebody moves up to like 34 because they want to get a guy and they just don't want to wait, Right. Yeah. Jeff, a guy that they probably have like a late first round grade on and they just want to make sure they get him.
Yep. Well, the cornerback group, and speaking of what Greg just said about late first round grade, Will Johnson, medical. Ravel, the corner from East Carolina, medical. Ben Morrison, medical. Then that's a real concern is that hip. That's why where they go in this round could be fascinating. They could drop all the way to the bottom. They could go early because you're betting on the upside and you're going to hang in there with the injury. Trey Amos is there, who the Eagles really like, right in for a visit. And by the way, they did not have Campbell in for a visit because the word was they didn't think they're going to get him. They just figured he'd go early, but he didn't, and they got it.
Right. Also, defensive tackle. We know they brought in some. A lot of them still available. Shamar Turner is still there. TJ Sanders is still there.
TJ Sanders is a guy that they brought in. I mean, there are guys that are there. It all depends. I think it depends on what who they have rated the highest, but Howie's known to do that. So we'll see what happens tonight.
All right, great stuff. Awesome. Greg, we thank you for joining us. It has been a really awesome experience, enlightening, and really looking forward to seeing over the next few years how Jihaad Campbell's career unfolds, and we'll be able to talk about it and break down his tape as a pro. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching Inside the Birds. Thanks for flying with us inside the Birds.